So I just thought that I would give you some insight into the backstory of the magazine and sort of what it's like in where I sit as an editor, especially in the 21st century. So some of this I'll end up reading. I'll try not to be too dull about it. But I thought I would bring you up to speed with some facts. If you don't know, we are a tri-quarterly, and we are entering our 45th year of publication. As Grant said, we were founded in 1971. We have subscribers on all 7 continents by now, which is a big thing for us. Our circulation is near that of the Paris Review, so we're one of the big magazines. In a small pond, we're a big magazine. In recent polls among contemporary writers, Ploughshares was second only to the New Yorker in terms of influence for a writer's career. Over our 45-year history, we've published Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners, U.S. poet laureates, and many other distinguished writers, of whom a few Grant mentioned. But our most important mission remains discovering new writers, discovering those writers who in 10, 20 years will be the famous writers. And so we want to be the first ones to publish them. And that's always the challenge in where I sit, because we get over 8,000, we get between 8 and 10,000 submissions a year. And that's in a 6-month reading period. So it's a big part of what we do. There are 60 screeners that work with me. All of them have their MFAs, and they are trained and screened by the magazine. So they do a tremendous amount of work. And I myself, that's a lot of what I do, is go into those open submissions and read parts. I read shorter than my other screeners do, but I read a short portion of many of them. Again, as Grant said, we were the first to publish Tim O'Brien, Sue Miller, Jane Ann Phillips, Edward P. Jones, and many other writers that you would recognize who've gone on to literary stardom. In addition to the 3 issues of original fiction, poetry, and literary nonfiction that we publish each year, we have for the past 5 years been publishing the Ploughshares solo series. Does anyone know about the Ploughshares solos? These are 9 digital-born long stories, long essays, and novellas. Each one, I will talk a bit more about that a little bit later, but each one is published by itself. It has its own little cover and its own little marketing campaign, so they're sort of treated like a little digital book. And then we gathered all of those into a print anthology at the end of the year that is kind of a 4th issue for our subscribers. So I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about our history. I think we may be the only literary journal in the U.S. that grew out of basically a bar fight. We started in the Plough and Stars pub in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Does anybody know the Plough and Stars? Yeah, great. Were you part of that? Were you involved at all? That's fantastic. I'm so glad to meet, because there were a lot of writers involved in this. There were lots of arguments that went on. You could probably, and I'm sure there was some drink involved. And so you had Irish expats, and you had Harvard PhDs, and Iowa Workshop, and Black Mountain Poets. And the main thing was that none of them could agree. And so, most people at that point would just say, we don't agree, and they'd go to their little corner and they'd start their own magazines. But this group, for some reason, decided to start a magazine together. And their concept was that it would be a platform for these arguments about what mattered in art, and even maybe the question, I think they all agreed art mattered, but they couldn't agree about what made something literature, what made it valuable as literature. So what they stumbled upon as a solution was that they would invite a different guest editor for each issue, and that guest editor could then invite those writers who they felt were doing important work, and the readers could decide. And so 45 years later, we're essentially doing the same thing. It's still part of our mission. And there were 2 men who kind of emerged as the ones who were maybe crazier than the rest of you, who were willing to do that kind of day-to-day work to take some financial risks. And that was Peter O'Malley, who was co-owner of the Plough and Stars Bar, and DeWitt Henry, who had a PhD from Harvard and had an MFA from the University of Iowa, and had been interested in literary journals since his undergraduate years at the Amherst University. So these two fellows sort of took the lead. And for a long time, DeWitt Henry, the magazine was being produced in his second bedroom of his apartment. And so they were an independent magazine for 18 years, and their headquarters moved eventually to Watertown. And they became famous for doing these literary readings. They were supposed to be, I think, fundraisers. I don't know how much money they actually raised. They maybe spent more, but they would have these really great writers, kind of Ray Carver and Richard Wilbur, and I think, it became kind of a big deal. Part of what the magazine had faced in those early years, though, was Boston is very traditional, and Boston was not excited about this new journal. They were, it's just a bunch of kids getting together and doing this thing, and nobody was really that interested. What changed things was when they invited a few of those Boston established literati to do their own issues. So when they were guest editors, suddenly I think they saw the value of the magazine, and it seemed to take off. So now, what's happened in the years since? So after that first sort of 18 years of being a freestanding journal, in 1989, in Boston, there's a college, Emerson College, which you may not have heard of, but DeWitt Henry was by then a tenured professor, and the college offered space, and they were paying his salary. And so that became a kind of stabilizing element. And the magazine then remained kind of semi-independent until 2008. At that time, they gave up their 501c3 status and they merged completely with the college. And that's when I joined the magazine. So I'm only the third editor to have edited the magazine. DeWitt Henry was followed by Don Lee. And some of you, if you've been sending to the magazine for a long time, you may have sent your work to Don Lee. And he did excellent work and is still in the world, but has moved on. He's now teaching at Trinity. So we have been really true to that guest editor policy for all of these years. When I joined the magazine, I'm someone who makes changes in a very slow way. And so I didn't come in and do radical changes. But we did redesign the magazine, both inside and out. The magazine had not been changed for all of the years that it had been published, and it needed an update. So this is the new design, and I have some copies here I want to give out later. We also, at that time, or shortly thereafter, we questioned giving the magazine over all 3 issues to a guest editor. So we limited it to 2 issues, the spring and the fall. And then in the winter, we started doing an emerging writers contest. And part of the winners, they're paid an honorarium of $1,000, and then they're published in the journal. And so we felt that we were already, in some ways, the staff was editing that issue. And so we do that now. The winter issue is staff edited. Okay, so Grant alluded to the idea that being a journal editor, a traditional print journal editor in the 21st century is a real challenge. And this was a challenge for me as a book editor too. And I've been an administrator at the University of Nebraska Press, which is one of the large university presses. And at the time that right around the time that I was leaving the press and going to the magazine is when the e-readers were invented. And that really solved a business model. That there was a problem. Open access is nice for consumers. Libraries like it, but for publishers, it's deadly because we have to earn back. We pay money up front for these products. So the ebook became a way that we could start earning back some of those costs. And so when I went to Ploughshares, the first thing I said was, we can't be open access anymore. Ploughshares had one of the early websites. It was a very ambitious website. It was built with a $100,000 grant from the Lila Wallace Foundation in 1994 or 6, I can't remember which. And it was very ambitious, and it had lasted until 2008 with a lot of duct tape and baling wire. It wasn't holding together very well. So I knew that we had to rebuild our website, which is a costly undertaking, that we also had to digitize our entire backlist, and we had to close it from open access because the magazine had made all of its archive available open access, which was very generous, but it was no longer, it didn't make business sense. And so these were all, of course, controversial things when you do these kinds of things. But since we've done that, I think it makes sense to most people. Let's see, so what did we do? We've actually redesigned the website twice. We just redesigned it a second time here just last year. I think it's only been maybe not even a year. And we had to make it mobile compatible because now our devices, our phones are what we really use all the time. And so we needed something that would work on phones. Another thing that we've been aware of, especially with the solos, these digital born stories, we've realized that the average age of our subscriber is 50, which I think that would tell you something about what's going to happen in 20 years. Who will be our subscribers? And so I'm as kind of uncomfortable as most people are, or as some people are, with this whole technology, thing. And e-readers, I don't use them. I read books. I could live without all of this. But I also realized it's not about me. It's not about my comfort. It's leaving this magazine better than I found it. I want this magazine to be thriving in 45 more years. And so what do we need to be doing now to ensure that happens? So the digital born long stories, first of all, it's something we can't publish in the journal. So it is a multiplier. It's something that we can do outside the magazine that makes absolute sense in that format. And the omnibus edition, which is a print edition, is a way to satisfy our paper readers. So we're still honoring that tradition. But another thing that we've really had to address is that we have this whole world available to us on the internet. And so if you haven't looked at our website, you might go home and look up our website. It's pshares.org. And we have a whole universe that is apart from the print issue that we publish. We have contributors who are blogging. We have all of our book reviews are online, which allows us to do roundup reviews. In other words, reviews of an entire body of work of an overlooked writer in our pages, which is more scholarly. And we can't be timely in the print edition, and we're having more pressure on us to kind of respond in a more timely way to new publications. So those are some of the changes that we've had to address and we've had to kind of face in a fearless way and hopefully not make too many mistakes. And so we now have, we also have a lively social media presence. That's another whole thing. It's all crazy to me. I'm on Facebook, but I don't post and I rarely go. But I have young staff members who are posting for Ploughshares 6 times a day. And they're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and we have almost 60,000 followers in that format. So we have to take all of this seriously because we don't have 60,000 subscribers. But we hope out of those 60,000 that there are people who will become the loyal subscribers of the journal that will take us into the next 45 years. So what about the future of publishing? I think that it's easy, and I don't know how often you talk to publishers, but publishers are kind of negative. And there's a sort of joke in publishing that the second book that came off the Gutenberg press was the death of publishing. So there's kind of just this, the sky is falling attitude. But one of the things that's been really great for me is that I teach a graduate class every year at Emerson College in the MFA program. And my students they always surprise me. I'm always prepared for them to come in and to start demanding that I have PowerPoints and that I do fancy things through technology. And instead, what they tell me is how precious it is that for that 4 hours a week, they can come into a place and they can talk to 10 other people about books and reading. And so it's kind of encouraged me because I realize that that's a very human thing that we want to do together. And you can do some of that stuff online, that's great, and it doesn't mean that they're Luddites, they're not, they're very technologically sophisticated, but they recognize this as a special time in their lives. Another thing that makes me hopeful is that that same MFA program they accept less than 50% of the applicants, which tells me that there are a lot of people who are interested in writing, interested in being what I think of as writers as it's a more serious kind of reader. It's a certain kind of reader who just wants to be closer to literature. So that's encouraging to me. What else is encouraging to me? Well, I think I keep saying that the online phenomenon or digitized texts, it's just content delivery. You know, whether it's between these two covers or whether it's on this device, it's still content. It's the same content. And content takes a long time to produce. It takes a lot to vet. It takes a lot to make it, to format it and to copy edit it. It's still a slow process. It's not slapdash. And that tells me that there's still a future for serious editors and for serious readers. So maybe I'm being a little bit of a Pollyanna. I think I do struggle with that a little bit, but I think there's reason for hope. I'm seeing more commitment to community around publishing and around books and book clubs and book culture. And so we've been told the book is going away, but instead we're seeing a kind of a proliferation of writers' festivals and conferences and journals. I'm going, in 2 weeks, I'll be going to the Associated Writing Programs Conference. It's an annual conference, some of you may know about it, in LA this year. There will probably be over 15,000 writers there, and that's just, you know, a tiny, tiny percent of the writer industrial complex. So there's a lot going on in the world of literature, and I'm not seeing it going away. I'm seeing young people who are still excited about writing and reading and talking about books, and some really, really smart stuff happening online and in print. So some tips for writers. I think the guest editor policy is probably the most bewildering thing if you're sending. Has anyone figured it out when you're submitting? Okay, good. So I'll give you some the inside thing here. So 90% of the issues that the guest editor does, or 90 pages rather, so 50%, they solicit directly from writers that they know and admire. And the remaining 50%, which is 90 pages, they have to choose from a short list that our staff has winnowed from our many submissions. So it's they have to really grapple with what's going on, with what's coming into the magazine. And most of them have been great about that. Every now and then I'll have somebody be a little snotty, but almost always they're very respectful. So that's the first kind of crazy thing. I do strongly recommend that you not submit trying to anticipate what the guest editor will like. I don't really read for the guest editor. I read, you're really competing with the group that we're finding right in front of us. And so just send the work that you're the most excited about and kind of trust that process. And I'd say you just have to keep sending. That's probably as much the secret as anything. And I don't have to tell you, it's highly, highly subjective. And it's a mystery to me too. And I'm there doing the work. I'm right in the middle of doing the winter issue. And I have lists of my short list, and I'm making notes of why I like something, and I'm going back and forth and asking myself a lot of questions. So I would say it's an art more than a science, and it is very subjective.
How many subscribers do you actually have?
We have 8,000 paid subscribers, and we have a circulation of 10,000. So, so these numbers seem small, I think. Here, we're not good housekeeping, but within literary journals, that's a big circulation. And we did double the circulation in 2009. So that was important to us, that we did bring our subscriber numbers up.
So all of your readers are MFAs. Not that MFAs are bad, but what about readers that aren't?
We do have an application process, and I do look at every application. And so if I am much more interested, quite frankly, in what you are reading and what you have been influenced by in terms of literature. So I will say no to an MFA who I think is too young or immature, or they're just reading stuff that I don't think they're still reading really 19th century. It's not helping me.
Wait, what's wrong with the 19th
I love
century?
the 19th century. I'm a rereader and I'm obsessed with all this stuff. But if you're reading contemporary literature and you're comparing it to Dostoevsky, I'm sorry, you probably are not going to be my best reader. You might be. I might be wrong.
Excellent point. Yeah.
But if you applied, and you could apply, because all of our readers read online. So that's another thing. If you're interested in being a screener, there is a role to be played. And so that's something that you could log on and do it. So we do have some remote readers, which is great.
You know, my name is Alicia McKenzie. I'm from the same place as Marlon James. Now we have a Man Booker winner, I can say
Right,
that.
that's a big deal.
Yes. But I keep reading that there's so many writers and fewer and fewer readers. Do you think that is something that we should be concerned about?
Well, were you here when I was talking about my reasons for optimism?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's part of what I'm saying is that we may be cynical about the MFA programs and the role that they play, but they are educating readers. They will or will not all go on to be writers or to publish, right? But they're going to remain serious readers. So I think that's important. I think just the kind of the proliferation of literary blogs. I don't know if you've been looking online, but the quality of writing. It's not just people publishing fiction, it's people writing about poetry and fiction and nonfiction. I think that there's a kind of high level of engagement. I'm really encouraged by that. And because I'm around these young people, I'm seeing them, they're really very entrepreneurial. They're not waiting around for the world to discover them. They're starting their own journals and presses. There's a huge proliferation of small presses that are doing beautiful books. They're winning awards. They're being reviewed. They're breaking out. In a lot of ways, technology has made this possible. For a while, the distribution channel shrank, and that was a real pressure on publishers. And then now these new technologies kind of exploded that again. So I almost see it as a kind of, there's a kind of new thing happening. And if you go to the associated writing programs, which I really kind of hope none of you have to do because it kind of drives me nuts, but just all these publishers and their beautiful books and people are excited about them. That's tells me something. And more writers' retreats and the festivals, they're very popular. So you tell me, but it seems to me that I've been in this business now for quite a while, and it seems to me that things are, and the book club phenomenon, I don't remember that when I was young. That seems to be something fairly new. So I think we like to be worried. I think we love to be worried and to feel threatened. And I would say that maybe the statistics don't quite add up to that. So, and there are lots more venues. There are a lot of journals starting too.
For someone who'd like to publish a short story collection, what percentage do you think should be published in journals before someone tries to get a collection published?
That's a good question. Journal publications are a way to signal or to reassure a book publisher, and I've seen it on the other end, that you are a known quantity, that you can attract a kind of a readership, that you're serious. So, I think some people publish all of them, some publish 50%. I've only published myself one collection, and probably only 50% of the stories have been published. And they were published in really small places. So I think it really depends. And there are more contests available now too for manuscripts. So if you aren't looking into that, do you get poets and writers? Do you read poets and writers? You know, often they'll announce those contests, and more of them are for short story collections. A lot of small presses don't require an agent if you don't have an agent. So, you know, I think for every bit of advice I would give you, I would say there's an exception, that somebody didn't publish a single story and blew someone's mind. They sent a collection and it blew their mind. You only need one editor to love your work. So I think it really depends on, I'll talk to you later if you'd like to, about what your strategy is for doing this. But, you know, I think it's hard to get published in a journal. It's very competitive. So you might be doing them simultaneously. You know, try to publish the collection and keep trying to publish the individual stories too. And then the best thing to do is to move on to the next project. Let that thing work for you, but don't be waiting. Don't make that your only baby. Start another baby. And then you can be excited about that. And you can kind of not put too much pressure on that other book and let it do its thing and try to get it published. But there are lots of great small presses. I think if you aren't looking at those, you should be looking at those too.
Quick questions. Number one, you said all 7 continents. I think all of us want to know who's the subscriber on Antarctica.
Yeah, you can imagine, right? It's somebody on one of those, the scientists.
It's got to be a scientist down there, right? Yeah, that's cool.
We are so proud of that one.
Oh, right?
You know, I mean, it's so impressive, right?
But more serious question. And this is something that bugs me as I'm flipping through. You know, it could be, you know, the Virginia Quarterly or, you know, the McSweeney's or Ten House or whatever. It seems like in the last few years, it's the George Saunders-ish kind of thing is going through.
Right.
When is that wave going to be done? And, you know, what else is kind of out there?
I feel your pain.
Yeah, I'm just done reading it.
Yeah, I know. I think it does.
George Saunders is wonderful.
I know. It's very hard to do something new. And I think he did something new. And I think that humor is very hard. And he made people laugh. I won't go into too much of this, but yeah, there are a lot, and the Amy Bender and the Karen Russell, and there's a lot of mimicking of these writers who, you know, it's I get tired of it too, and I have to say that Ploughshares, as a rule, tends to publish, at least the short lists, tend to be kind of, you know, just kind of old-fashioned in some ways. Psychological realism, and I really myself, I'm not looking for a hook. Often I'm put off by a hook. That's just my own personal preference, and you know, other editors might disagree, but most editors make decisions very quickly. I'll read a first page and I'll know a lot about that story, and so a lot of it is just authority. And that's a quiet thing, a kind of living and inhabiting a time and a space and a world, because that's what I'm looking for, is what does it mean to live right now? Because that's a document of what artists were experiencing in this moment of living, and you know, some do it better than others, and I think that. You know, none of us knows what sticks. You know, that's the kind of sad truth for me as an editor, that a small percentage of what we publish will last, and we won't get to decide it. It will be decided by history. So the things that I love may or may not, you know, and it doesn't mean they're less worthy. It just means that the vagaries of history, it's all very mysterious. And we're constantly discovering writers who had important things to say, but they stopped writing and publishing, or they didn't have champions, or they only published in certain places that didn't get noticed. And then maybe we rediscover them years later, and we're excited, and how do we not know about this person? So it's just, and that can be a role. Sometimes that's something you could be doing as a writer who's trying to find your place, is to help other writers, you know, being a good citizen. What can you do to give back to the literary world in a way that's true to you and genuine to you? So maybe it's writing reviews. Maybe it's trying to discover those writers that nobody's talking about, or why aren't we talking about this person anymore? So I'm not sure I answered your question. I'm a digressor, but hopefully something else got answered in there. I don't know when it's gonna pass. I hope it passes soon. But then there will be something else annoying that will come along.
Something else.
Because fads are annoying. And and editors don't innovate, only writers innovate. So I can't tell you what that will be. I just have to hope that I'm smart enough and quick enough and lucky enough to recognize it and to publish it.